Hello, everyone. Today at City-REDI External Seminar Series, we have the presentation by Rhiannon Pugh from Lund University. The title of the presentation today is about the changing role of universities during the COVID-19 crisis. In particular, she is going to be presenting some qualitative research that has been conducting in one project developed at the University of Lund. So Rhiannon Pugh is a senior lecturer in innovation studies at Circle, the Center for Innovation Research at Lund University in Sweden. And previously, she works at Örebro and Uppsala universities in Sweden and Lancaster University Management School in the UK. She holds a PhD in economic geography from Cardiff University, and her current research explores innovation policy, regional development in non-core areas, and the role of universities in their regions. So now the floor is yours, Rhiannon. More or less around 30-35 minutes of presentation, so we will leave some space for questions and answers. Thank you very much for presenting today in our seminar series.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you for the nice introduction. It's so nice to be here. I wish I could be there in person because Birmingham University is one of my favourite, most beautiful university campuses in the UK, but yeah, maybe sometime soon. Let me just share my screen. Yeah, so my idea today was to present some very recent research that I've been working on, which is about the changing roles of universities, both during the COVID crisis, but also I've been trying to go back and sort of do an updated literature review about the changing role of universities over time, and then kind of update that with what's happened in the last year or so. So I will kind of talk you through a bit of that work and then sort of end with that kind of discussion of what's been going on in the last year or so, which I'm sure lots of people will also have some input on because it's something that we've all been living through as well as observing it in an academic sense, just in our daily work lives. So it'll be interesting to hear kind of what your reflections and experiences of that are as well. So yeah, please ask any questions. I might not see them as we go through the presentation, but it's not a problem to interrupt me. It's just that if you put it in the chat, I might not spot it until after, but feel free just to jump in if you have something that needs clarifying or a kind of quick response. Yeah, so I kind of became quite interested in the roles of universities in regional development during my PhD thesis, which was conducted at Cardiff University from 2010 to 2014. And I was looking at the triple helix there. And that's when I started researching and writing about the roles of universities in regional development. And I've just kind of put up there, just kind of for your reference, where I've kind of come at this from. And originally it was about sort of interrogating triple helix in Wales. Then I started working in Lancaster and I started looking at what's the role of universities in doing like regional economic development programs. And I was actually employed on a large economic development program that was regional growth funded. So I sort of ended up both working on a program and observing it as a researcher. And then I had some opportunities, for instance, to go to Brazil, which I think, if I saw correctly, there's somebody that I need to credit for starting that, which is Phil Shapiro, who I think might be here today, who was someone who was instrumental in finding this funding from the researcher links and took a bunch of early career scholars to Brazil, which is where I met my, not where I met, but I had the chance to go and do some data collection with my co-author Elisa Thomas, which is where some recent work about universities in the global south came from. And then obviously when the whole COVID situation happened and the roles of universities were obviously changing quite rapidly, we became interested in that. And before I go on, I just want to credit some co-authors and colleagues who have been really instrumental in developing this work. And I can't really claim that all the ideas are sort of my own, and I've been working so closely with them that it's kind of infiltrated my own thinking, so I don't really know anymore what's their ideas and what's my ideas. And that's Danny Sotanto and Ellie Hamilton at Lancaster, Sarah Jack in the Stockholm School of Economics, and Elisa Thomas in Norway. And there are lots of other people as well, but these are the ones that I'm currently working with and where some of this came from. I'm also doing some work at the moment with Maribel Guerrero up in Newcastle, who we've also been discussing these ideas a lot. So yeah, there's a lot of other people that need credit for this as well. And I saw this yesterday when I was putting together my slides, and I thought, oh, I better include this because it was so topical. And that's a tweet, and it's about Birmingham recently being ranked first amongst all English universities for the contribution to local growth and regeneration. So I thought that was just kind of like really lucky timing that this was published yesterday, just when I was about to come and give a talk to those of you at University of Birmingham about the role of universities in regional development. So it's a little bit like taking coals to Newcastle or South Wales, where I come from, that I'm coming and telling these things to those of you who are clearly some of the top people in the country doing this kind of work. So there's probably as much that you have to tell me, more that you have to tell me than I have to tell you. Yeah. Yeah, so basically, I'm sure as most of you are aware, and I know a lot of you have been instrumental in working on this kind of body of literature, that there is a big literature there about universities and regional development. But there are a lot of different terms that have kind of been used, and some of them have been more popular than others at other times. But there's been all these kind of different concepts and terms coming out, such as entrepreneurial university, engaged universities, anchor institutions, civic universities. So that's been like a lot of the work that John Goddard and the Kurds group have been doing about those kind of things. The third mission, triple helix, mode 2 universities. You can find other terms as well. I'm sure you're all aware of these. And it's kind of this over proliferation of different terms that are all talking about different roles that universities are playing in their regions. At the moment, something I'm trying to do is write a book chapter for a monograph that I'm writing with Ellie Hamilton and Danny Sotanto at Lancaster. And the title of the book is, well, the preliminary title is Rethinking Entrepreneurship and Regional Development. And I'm trying to approach a chapter on universities, entrepreneurship and regional development. And I thought, gosh, I really need to kind of update some sort of literature review on this, because there were some literature reviews conducted. There was quite a good one by Elvira Yara. I never quite know how to pronounce her name. Sorry if she ever sees this. I messed it up. And she did quite a good review of the role of universities in regional development, but that was back in 2010. So that was like the fresh thinking when I started my PhD in 2010, but sort of 10, 11 years have passed since then. So I also wanted to kind of update, there have been some other sort of reviews and things as well, but I kind of wanted to update that a bit and see where we were at in our kind of thinking, our terminologies, and where we were at. But where we're at seems to be quite confusing because we're in this period of big flux and change because of COVID in terms of what the university is and the roles that it's playing. So it turned out to be a bit of a harder task than I thought it would be. So at the moment, I've got these two strands going on. One is this kind of literature-based stuff where I'm going back into reading quite heavily, and also some empirical work, which is about people's experiences during this period of how the university is changing. So this presentation is a bit of a mishmash of both of those things. And I have to apologize, and you have to forgive me if the presentation is not super smooth, because I am presenting work that's in progress rather than something that is published and polished. Because I thought that this was such an interesting topic to talk about with the City-REDI community, I really wanted to kind of present stuff I was working on, but the flip side of that is that it is, yeah, it's not completely well formulated at this stage. So I'm sure you're all aware of this kind of language around missions, that we had the kind of research and teaching missions, and then the third mission added, which was mostly commercialization. And I suppose there's a question mark at the moment about, are we seeing a fourth mission added, which is more about kind of community engagement, regional roles, social innovation, all those sorts of things, sort of beyond the economic commercialization mission? Or is it some sort of iteration on the third mission? So maybe that's something that people have opinions on that we can talk about afterwards. Is it just a kind of expansion or a different take on the third mission, or is it a whole other mission that we're seeing and a whole other line of work? So that's something I've been thinking about a little bit. So I've been doing a little bit of looking up in the literature about what other people think about this. And in very recent literature, perhaps this is kind of sounding quite obvious to you, but I guess the last couple of years I haven't been doing a huge amount of reading, partly because I've been off on maternity leave for a year. But I found a few papers in the last couple of years using this fourth mission language a bit more. So I don't know if we're starting to see the beginning of a bit of a peak on the fourth mission. So I saw one definition, which was universities answering the demands of society. They were using fourth mission. And then I found another couple of contributions that were using fourth generation university, which again was one I hadn't come across before. So that was a couple of references from the last year or two. And they were thinking more along the lines of universities contributing to the sustainability agenda, and that was like the fourth generation. And I found a very recent paper, which was that the fourth generation university is going to have to respond both to that kind of sustainability climate crisis, which is getting more and more extreme, and this COVID crisis that we've just had now. So yeah, that's basically my kind of question. Like, are we stepping in now to this fourth mission, or is it somehow just an iteration on business as usual that we've been seeing for the last 20 or 30 years since the kind of entrepreneurial university really took off? And then, yeah, we kind of get to this issue that I mentioned already of COVID-19. And obviously we've been seeing changes in the roles of universities over the last years. We've seen the kind of rapid expansion, massification of education around the world. We've seen the kind of increasing neoliberalization, the increasing audit culture, increasing precarity in academia, you know, all these things that you all know about that we've been experiencing, plus these kind of greater demands on universities in terms of, yeah, sustainable development, but also regional inequalities and social inequalities that we know have become more pronounced since the last economic crisis hit in 2008. And universities have obviously been expected to play a role in addressing that kind of regional development agenda, which is something that I know that City-REDI have also been involved with, that agenda of kind of regional governance, regional development, regional rebalancing, these kind of issues. But then we've had COVID-19 hit, which has been a kind of crisis of a new sort, and it's been a public health and an economic crisis together, or at least we still don't know exactly what the economic crisis is going to be, but we can see that there is something there that's like shaking up the economy and society in that kind of public health sense. So yeah, I mean, what does that mean for universities? Obviously this is a very recent thing, so there is some work out there that's people have been very efficient, or more efficient than myself, at writing up and publishing, clearly. But it's obviously not a sort of huge amount at the moment, but for instance, there's this Universities UK report which sees COVID-19 as a significant risk to UK universities' ability to contribute to the economy, and that this might have sort of negative effects over the long term on the UK economy. And obviously there's loads of different ways documented in which COVID-19 has actually shaken the university to its core. And one of those ways has been the kind of the student side, which is like the campus closures and the moves to online teaching, which has obviously had a lot of pedagogical issues, but it's also had this kind of student support issue, these more pastoral issues. So that's been a big challenge that universities have had to address. And there's also been something that, well, I don't think we've really experienced in Sweden because our system is not so premised on international student fees, but I know in the UK, and also the reference here is from Australia, there's big concerns about the fact that, well, yeah, border closures meant international student numbers were significantly cut. And that has, you know, left a big hole in universities' budgets. And I keep seeing more and more layoffs being announced. Like, I feel like in the last month or two, I think there's been like 3 or 4 big UK universities where there's been whole departments sort of put under risk and stuff. I think Liverpool was the last one I saw, maybe even this week. So there's obviously, and I think some have been in the US as well. So there's obviously an issue there where some subjects might be at risk because of these sort of budget issues that have been caused by the crisis. So and this as Smith or Smythe, I'm not sure how this person's name is pronounced, sort of wrote a piece that's kind of asking very deep questions about what is the purpose of research within universities, what is the nature of academic work itself, what is the nature of universities given this situation and this crisis. And I feel like at the moment well, that's all very up in the air, and we're actually just kind of going through it day by day, and it's not clear exactly how this is going to play out. But it has, for those of us who are interested in like the evolving roles of universities in their regions, and just universities as kind of institutions or big organizations in themselves, it's an interesting time to be doing research and collecting data, because it is such a time of change that we've all experienced. And one recent publication by Harry de Boer in the Netherlands was using the metaphor of a roller coaster. And that's actually a term that people echoed when I did interviews with university staff about their COVID experience, that it really has been a roller coaster for people. And in a lot of ways, the way that we've been doing things and the way that we've been kind of going through our work routines and our processes, which have been fairly, I guess, stable for quite a while, we're now kind of on this roller coaster, which has all kinds of different effects on us. And that's probably something that like all of us have been experiencing over the last year, and something that maybe we need a little bit of time to kind of reflect on and process, maybe after the kind of madness of teaching and examination and things end. And maybe that's something we also need to make space for as a community. And maybe at the end of this presentation is one such space where we get to have a bit of a reflection on like, okay, oh, I can't swear because I'm being recorded, but what on earth just happened? Like, let's stop a minute and just, you know, and when we can, to go to a conference and sit down and have a beer or a coffee or whatever your drink of choice is, and just say, you know what did we just like live through for that 18 months? What happened to our working life and our personal life, and how did it all get blurred? So I think we also need to talk about both us as an academic community, but also with our students, right, that we've tried to support through this time in their learning. We also probably need to think about where do we find space, maybe with our, you know, our local communities as well, our local businesses who we used to, some of you probably used to work with quite regularly. Maybe we need some like decompression to kind of understand, yeah, what has happened and what we're going to do to kind of process that. So, I mean, what I've been doing at the moment is, it's a few different projects. One of them is like what I was talking about, reviewing the recent literature on the roles of universities and updating it for the COVID era. And that's for this book, monograph book that I'm currently writing with Ellie and Danny. And this is obviously tricky because new papers are being published all the time, as we all know, but there's quite a lot of stuff coming out quite quickly about the kind of COVID experience. And I think there's another interesting dynamic there that I'm sure you've all been following the chatter about the fact that sort of submissions to journals, people actually writing and doing that kind of work has been very kind of gender biased and this sort of thing. So I think there's also an issue here where we update our research about the roles of universities, you know, or about any kind of research. Yeah, how do we kind of take account of those inequalities over the last year or two, and how they've translated into sort of who's managing to actually get work published at the moment. And I know from my own perspective, it's been a really challenging time to actually trying to write new stuff. Like many of you probably, I've been trying to work at home with 2 small children, basically screaming in my ear and jumping on me for the best part of 9 months. And it feels like a difficult time to be trying to write this stuff. But at the same time, there's that kind of urgency of, yeah, we really need to try and figure out what's going on and capture this moment while it's happening. So it is a bit stressful, actually. And that's probably why it's good to, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to talk about this, because it's also helping me to kind of process some of it. And another thing that I've been working on with some colleagues that I'll talk about in a minute in Sweden is that we've done some focus group interviews with PhD students in Sweden. I think we've spoken at the moment to about 20 PhD students from different research groups and departments. Because in this rapidly being published new work, we didn't see much was being talked about PhD students. And it seemed like a kind of particularly vulnerable group, or a group with their own sort of specific circumstances that could be quite sort of problematic during the pandemic, especially in terms of if you're a PhD student and you don't have a strong kind of academic network how do you kind of do that during the pandemic? How are you being affected by that? So we did some focus group interviews around that, and we're currently trying to write up a paper about that on the Swedish case, and we're thinking maybe to try and expand this beyond the kind of sample that we have. But again, we're a group of 4 researchers who all have like preschool age children at home, so it's been really slow progress. And I've also been working on this project with my colleague Maribel Guerrero, and we've been talking to more senior staff members from mostly within management schools or centres like yourselves. And we've done our first batch, and we're hoping to maybe come back to people again in the autumn, and maybe in a couple of years, even when all this is hopefully, oh my gosh, touch wood, hopefully kind of blown over, to see how long term those changes have been. But that's all very kind of up in the air at the moment, so I can't tell you too much kind of tangible findings from that. But the qualitative research with the PhD students in Sweden is kind of completed and analysed, so I can talk a little bit more about that. So I will just briefly, for the rest of my sort of 10 minutes or something, talk about the research that we've been doing in Sweden. And maybe that's also interesting to you, because I know the Sweden pandemic response has been receiving like a lot of attention in the international press. And I think that was another part of our motivations, that we had this feeling like everybody was reading this kind of international press and thinking that nothing had changed in Sweden and life had gone on as normal, which wasn't the case. We've actually been fully online teaching. I've been fully online teaching since, well, I was on maternity leave at the time, but Swedish researchers have been fully online since I think the end of March, and we never went back in person or anything. Well, I think some of the medical schools and stuff might have, but those of us in like social science. I've recently had some office access restored, but for I think about 7 months I was fully working at home, like people in other parts of the world as well. So we also wanted to kind of dig a bit deeper into what was happening to PhD students in Sweden and tell that story a little bit, just because we knew that it becomes such a buzzy thing to talk about Sweden during the pandemic. So we actually came at it from a sort of social networking perspective. And we wanted to find out what PhD students thought was kind of good practice for social activities and networking in the university in a normal time. And then how has that changed, during the pandemic time? And then how has your productivity been affected by that? Have you experienced any dilemmas about trying to make decisions about your work and your teaching? And we also tried to ask them what kind of advice that they would give to kind of supervisors and university management to help PhD students. So maybe that's kind of interesting for people who are kind of PhD supervisors and things as well. And just briefly, my colleagues that I've been working on this with, Christina Steen Jensen, Cecilia Tilberg, and Amal Mojum, and myself. And basically, I can just tell you a little bit about what we found from talking to these people. For the PhD students, perhaps predictably, the biggest changes for them has been in terms of research, which is slightly different to the staff that we've been speaking to at more senior levels, where the biggest changes has maybe been around teaching and engagement, depending on what kind of research they do. But for the PhD students, because their roles were mostly research oriented, it's really the kind of research that's been affected. And we found that universally across our 20 PhD students, who are across, I think, 5 universities in Sweden, and they were all from different disciplines and research groups within that. So it was, it was from the people who conduct the beam experiments at the big science facility in Lund to kind of social scientists in northern parts of Sweden. So it was really a big mixture. And they had actually surprisingly similar experiences, I guess. And that was basically about that they couldn't quantify or put a number on how disrupted their PhD process had been, basically, by the pandemic. And that when they were asked to give, accounts of prolongation, they would be able to say, well, I missed this many weeks because the lab was closed, or I missed this much data collection because I couldn't go out and observe people. But what they were really struggling to account for was just the slowness of academic work, how the loneliness, how not being able to chat to people and bounce ideas off people, how the lack of kind of conferences to go to get ideas from outside your own small department, how all these things were kind of affecting their productivity. And And we also found that, and this might be different to an experience in the UK, it might be similar, I can't say because we didn't conduct equivalent interviews in the UK. But in Sweden, the responses from the different departments were very kind of decentralized. So you had central university and government edicts, but you also had departments making their own rules. So some PhD students were completely sent home and not allowed to go into the office and didn't have any equipment. They just had to use their own personal laptops. And during the interviews, PhD students were showing us their sort of terrible fold-out garden chairs that they were sitting and working on in their bedroom because that was all they had. Whereas in other places, PhD students were kind of given equipment they needed, or they were allowed to use their offices. So it was very kind of case by case, based on different departments, which is also quite problematic. And we also found that there were actually a lot less differences between domestic and international students than we were expecting. We thought that maybe the international students would be having, we kind of assumed that they might be having a particularly more difficult time because they were separated from family. But we found that most of the domestic students, and especially in a country like Sweden where distances are very big between regions and people were advised not actually to travel between regions, there was a lot of sort of familial separation, partners getting separated, people not being able to visit their friends and family, almost as much sort of within the domestic students as the international ones. We also found that there was quite a lot of communication problems in actually delivering the messages about how PhD students should be undertaking their work, what rules they should be following, how they should be managing things like lab access if they really needed to go in and like check some samples. But they were really struggling with like a confusing scenario where they couldn't they couldn't kind of figure out what they were supposed to be doing. They had perhaps different advice coming from the Swedish national government that was coming from their direct line manager and things like this. So it was very confusing. Yeah. And we also found that the migration to online activities for PhD students, unfortunately, the consensus was that these kind of online activities, I suppose a bit like we're doing here, but the PhD students in particular found that they were, I wouldn't say useless because they didn't say that they were useless, but they said that they were severely lacking compared to when they used to be able to go and do PhD courses or go to conferences or go to PhD summer schools. They found the migration to the online versions to be very much a sort of poorer cousin of the real thing. And they found that if it wasn't a community where they'd already met people and already had established links, it was almost impossible for them to do that with the digital scenario. So I think there's some important questions there for those of us who think spatially about that kind of difference between the physical presence and the digital presence. And if we're going to keep having things digitally, which has obviously been great in a lot of ways, because we can do things like we're doing today and go to different universities around the world, and we can have very cheap, low carbon conferences. Sorry, I'm just going to shut my window because there's some building work or something. There we go. That basically we need to think also about those people that don't have their academic networks established, that need to meet people, that need to kind of make friends in academia, who need to get outside of their own departmental bubbles for the sake of their kind of research projects, but also for the sake of their ongoing academic careers. And I think thinking about our suggestion was that, it's kind of the role of university managers and supervisors to, when it is safe and possible to do that, to think about being smart about like unlocking our networks, to maybe providing some extra funding for PhD students who want to go to a conference or a summer school, and just being really mindful of the fact that for them to lose 2 years of kind of networking activities can be quite a big issue for them. I'm going to stop there because I'm rapidly running out of time for my half-an-hour talk. There's obviously a lot of different findings and things that we found from talking to the PhD students, but I just wanted to sort of highlight some of the most important ones there, and also maybe things that you can think about in relation to your own PhD students and your own PhD community, as to whether those are issues that they've been experiencing as well, or whether that's very much just issues that we've been facing in Sweden, or whether they're more universal. So yeah, really looking forward to hearing your feedback, and thank you so much for paying attention to what I had to say.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm just going to open now for questions and comments. Is there anyone who would like to formulate any question? Philip Shapiro?
Yeah, I'll have a go. Thanks, Rhiannon. It's good to see you again and your research. I think it's obviously the case, as you indicated, that lots of students and faculty have been deeply affected during the pandemic, and also that a number of faculty and researchers have done enormous efforts, in trying to address some of the public health issues and vaccine issues. So just take that as well, and lots of individual pressures particularly on students and maybe on faculty as we kind of come out from this. But what's the case that universities as institutions themselves are really going to change and really learn from this? I mean, as I look around, I see demands, we're going to return back to face-to-face teaching in the conventional way. We'll be recruiting more international students. We'll be dealing with the government in terms of funding shortfalls. I mean, this is all stuff that we were doing before. So just to be devil's advocate, and particularly since you started with this notion of kind of transitions of university functions, perhaps more into that fourth mission, what's the evidence that universities as an institution are actually, willing, empowered, or able to kind of move along that path?
Yeah, thank you for that good question. Yeah, so I think the insights that we have from that are probably from the other project that I didn't talk so much about here, because we haven't actually gone through and analysed it all yet, but obviously conducted some interviews, so I have some things in my head. But I think the first thing is to say this is why we think we do need to do a longitudinal study and follow up with people in a couple of years, or maybe even on a longer time horizon, to see, like you say, whether it just flips back to this kind of business as usual, or whether some of the changes we've seen are here to stay. I think the slight issue with that is we actually have some funding at the moment to help us conduct these interviews, but it's only for a year. I think the slight issue with that is whether we can kind of manage to make it into a research proposal that we can have some longitudinal funding for in order to revisit that. But I think my initial response would be that I think there has been a difference based on business as usual in terms of the speed that universities have changed, and quite a lot of the people that I've spoken to have been quite surprised that that universities have been able to actually do things as quickly as they have. And I think, well, there's two things you could say about that. One is maybe, well, that's just people's perceptions. So yeah, maybe it's not, maybe you have seen examples where universities are very rapidly responding to regional situations in the past. But I think maybe this is a case where that has been happening quite quickly. I think the other side of that is that a lot of people have, like you say, there's been these great kind of breakthroughs. Also, those people that I was speaking to who look at regional development, a lot of them had got very rapid research projects to, look at what was going on and to write policy focused reports and feed those back. There might be some people here who've also had that kind of funding. I suppose the question is, like, have we been able to deliver change very quickly because we've all been massively kind of self-exploiting / being exploited by our institutions? This thing where, I don't know if it's the same for the rest of you, but I had to migrate a large master's course online with a week's notice because we were all going to go back to face-to-face teaching, and then the infection load was too high and we suddenly couldn't. And yeah, I mean, amazing. Who would have thought that we could deliver our courses online with no training, with no time to prepare, and as far as we can tell from the student feedback, not do an awful job of delivering that. I mean, yeah, who would have thought we could do that so quickly? But I don't know about anybody else, but like, I'm completely exhausted and actually felt quite ill for quite a lot of the last year from, the stress and the intense workload of doing that. So I think for me, that's also part of the question. Like, if we have seen very rapid response and kind of really good things happening from amongst our colleagues, is that even sustainable? Like, do we want to go in that direction? Like, is that a sustainable change? I suppose I would throw that back to you and like ask you whether you think that's a kind of sustainable way to go for universities. Or would we rather go back to a slightly more slower, sort of monolithic? I think someone in the interview said that we always used to think universities were like oil tankers going along and that we couldn't turn them quickly, but we actually found out that those oil tankers can be turned a lot quicker than we thought they could. But maybe we all want to go back to that really slow chugging along oil tanker because it was a lot less stressful than the last year has been.
There is a question by Mabel.
Yes, hi Rhiannon. Thanks a lot for your presentation. I would like to explore a bit your background on regions and so what I have read, because the research that is going on about changes of universities, the majority of the things are opinion pieces and the research is going on. So we will see probably in 1 or 2 years the different things that have changed probably. Students, we know what has happened exactly with all the things you were saying. Moving everything online has been a huge effort from all our sides. In terms of research, I think we have 2 sides to look at. One is research related to COVID-19 that flourished literally, and the other part of research that was not so COVID related that probably put on hold for a while. So we will see 2 different trends and research activities. My question is more about what happened with third mission, fourth mission engagement, whatever is the name we would like to call it, all this interaction between the university and non-academic actors. So because the international travel was banned for a while, there was some months where originally I thought that maybe we as researchers, we will start to think locally. So to try to bring and help our regions and the business in the regions on how to, how they can survive better, if you want, to the situation. Is the pandemic helping us to be or to have universities that could be more locally engaged? It's something that the literature has claimed for quite a lot, but only few universities really are doing that, even if from a theoretical point of view makes a lot of sense. So I would like to hear your view on that and your expertise on the geographical level. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mabel. Yeah, so when I was conducting interviews, I did quite a few in the UK actually. So this is maybe more UK derived insight. I spoke to quite a few people who were in universities that had a bit of a tradition of that kind of regional engagement, local engagement with small businesses. And they were doing quite a lot. They said that they basically had a kind of switching happening where very quickly new kind of funding schemes had come in order to provide local support, and they were sort of delivering that. But I'm not a data person, so I don't have the data on this, but my impression from speaking to people was that it was a replacement happening. So I don't know whether it was more regional engagement happening with like local businesses and stuff, or it was just that the old schemes that were running got replaced and reoriented with new sort of more COVID response ones. My suspicion, or not suspicion, but my impression from talking to people that took place is switching. So the net amount of local or regional engagement might not be that difficult. I mean, there have been. I think some of the researchers that I've spoken to had found that they were having more interaction with local and regional governments since the pandemic, because they had a more immediate need at the regional level for kind of economic data and things like this. So I did speak to some people who found that they had a closer relationship with non-national, I guess, policy actors. And they saw that as quite a positive thing. Whether that will continue or not kind of remains to be seen, and whether we did just see a switching of activities and then it will just switch back, or whether we have seen an increase. I'm a little bit skeptical, to be honest, Mabel, that there's actually been more volume overall, if you know what I mean. But yeah, I guess you would need some sort of more quantitative analysis to see that kind of volume versus switching effects.
Yeah, it's clear that the budget coming from the government has been literally reoriented towards the particular needs that they had. But it's a good way to exploit our expertise as researchers and to help our, well, it's some kind of the leveling up policy of the UK, right? That's a bit the idea. Try to help the regions to go through all these different socioeconomic problems that we are facing, and all together from the different angles we can provide expertise on helping to pass by quicker. Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Rhiannon.
Thanks, Mabel. I just one follow up to that is that I think there's been quite a lot of opportunities. There's been people who've had rapid research funding to look at this. There's been people who've been able to do very rapid work. But coming back to that issue where journal editors were saying we've been seeing a lot more submissions from men than women during this time, who was able to write those funding proposals really quickly to respond to those quick calls? Again, I haven't spoken to enough people and I haven't done any quantitative analysis to say this. My question would be, have we seen during the pandemic a lot of kind of opportunities for impact, but also for new research projects and new publications opening up for that certain demographic of the academy that has always been at the forefront? And I think we all have the impression that this inequality, both within the academy as well, has probably been exacerbated by that. And part of that is about this speed thing, about who can respond really quickly and who can write things really quick.
I'm just going to take the opportunity to be the chair, just jumping in asking a question here. I do think that it's more a comment than a question. I think that the pandemic has accelerated the trends. So I feel like already there were many people, and in probably the last years, because I think that in Europe, because of regional innovation, place-based kind of activities and opportunities has been also more present. In the UK also, because there have been also administrative changes, so the role of combined authorities also has maybe facilitated more a more local or regional interaction with higher education institutions. So I think that the COVID also has accelerated those trends that already were happening and maybe were unstructured, and they have put in place maybe some funding or maybe some opportunities to catalyze and formalize more these things that they were happening anyway, but maybe now they had a bit more support. Simon, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thanks, and maybe comment a little. And thanks very much, Rhiannon. It's fantastic to meet you. And actually, this isn't a criticism, but given your track record of publications, I was thinking you were going to talk more about universities' impact on their regions rather than COVID's impact on us as universities. But it's been really interesting. I mean, just picking up your last point about gender bias, there is some very solid evidence that the UKRI was very strongly male biased in its allocation of funding before the pandemic, and there are early signs that that has been exacerbated. So I think you're quite right, and I think data will be coming out on that, and I think that's something that absolutely has to be addressed. Just stepping back a bit, I mean, you're right, at the moment it's really difficult to tell, but we're quite aligned. In fact, we're founding partners at City-REDI and the University of Birmingham there's a new National Civic Universities network that is, getting a bit of a voice at the moment, and it's gathering quite a lot of evidence. And some of the early signs from the network of universities, some of it might be self-serving and showcasing of exemplar cases, but there does seem to be a number of universities that already had strong civic roots, and more importantly, the relationships and infrastructure to respond to, a crisis. And they did several things, beyond at the national level, producing a lot of work on vaccines and the uptake of vaccines. I think they did a lot of work on PPE very, very early, transforming facilities into manufacturing factories for this. And a lot of that was locally directed, in our case, to the hospital trusts and to social care workers. Secondly, students reacted, and we've got very good evidence that students went out and did food deliveries and community work in a way that was a step up from previously. Then thirdly, the kind of things we do, which is a bit more anomalous. We have, set up at City-REDI, we've done 55 of these weekly reports that monitor the economic impacts of the COVID pandemic, and then advise the local government, the mayor's office, on how you intervene to alleviate the impacts. So these are all really good things. I think your key question is, I have a question in a minute, but I think your key question is, well, how much of this lasts as we move later, and the government now is talking very strongly about an innovation strategy, which has in it an element of focused R&D and levelling up. You know, the question is, what are the incentives put in place to get universities more hooked into that agenda versus becoming more disconnected from, I don't know if you understand the government rhetoric at the moment, but despite the university's efforts around pandemic, universities are coming under a hammering in the UK. Absolute hammering, criticised for absolutely everything. The question is if you know, the infrastructure and the incentives steer a way of shaping universities to take more responsibility, accountability for that regional impact to help levelling up, or actually if they become more disconnected post-pandemic. And I think that's a big question. So really interesting. Sorry, so my question is really about what you observe as the difference between us and where you are at the moment, because national infrastructures are so totally different. First of all, in the way that universities relate to their regions, but secondly, in the central government policies that may or may not facilitate that. So I was just interested in your reflections on that.
Yeah, it's a little. Firstly, yeah, thank you for your comments. It sounds like your experiences of what have been happening are quite similar to those that other people had reported. I hadn't come across that example of students actually reacting to the pandemic and kind of coming up with their responses to the community. So that's a really interesting one. I'd be interested to kind of talk to you about that. So that's food for thought. Yeah, the problem I have at the moment is that the data is very different in the two countries. On the Sweden side, it's the PhD students, and on the UK side, it's seniors who are working at the kind of regional engagement interface. So it's what I need to do is follow up interviews in Sweden with people at the university regional development interface and try and find out how they've been responding. I guess I can speak a little bit from being based at Circle, which is an interdisciplinary research centre, a little bit like yourselves, I think. And we have directly sort of policy actors and things who sit on the boards, and I think that engagement has been ongoing. But I'm not aware of the same kind of rapid response special sort of programs that were given national government funding to the universities to deliver that I know happened in the UK. I don't know if Birmingham was involved in delivering some of those sort of emergency to support to local businesses. I'm not aware of those happening in Sweden. I would need to dig into it a bit deeper, but so I think there has been that difference in response, and that I think maybe in the UK there has been a bit more of that kind of well, yeah, what Mabel mentioned, maybe actually diverting projects that were previously happening into COVID response. It's kind of hard to talk about without getting into the kind of national responses to COVID as well. And that's also a kind of conversation that I'm a little bit too exhausted to kind of step into, having had to like live through it, I think, for a year, being like a British person, but also recently having gained Swedish citizenship and living here. It's all just a bit, well, I'm sure you all know how contentious it has been. Oh yeah, thanks, Simon. That's the scheme that quite a lot of people mentioned that I was conducting an interview with in the UK. I haven't heard of an equivalent happening in Sweden. I need to do a bit more digging, but my initial response is that it's been a bit of a different thing. But yeah, the short version being like kind of stepping into the debate about national responses at the moment feels like way too exhausting. But yeah, it's really, thanks very much for sharing your insights based on what's happening there. It's it'd be nice actually in the follow-up interviews maybe to speak to one of you guys from City about what you've been doing, City-REDI.
Yeah, I also wanted to reflect on my own experience as teaching at the business school and also being supervising some PhD students. And I feel like actually the assessments from undergraduate students and at the master levels, they were quite positive. So they were very appreciative of all the work that we have been doing, and also in particular, also some international students that they were not physically in the UK. While PhD students, they have to be in my case, they are more polarized. Either they are very negative towards, in particular, the ones that are not physically on campus, and the ones that they came on campus, they are again very positive. They appreciate if you want to meet them, even if it is on a garden, you know, or in a place where there is a space to meet them. So I don't know. I have the feeling that looking at different type of students, they might also give you a more nuance. And I think that from your comments, it was a very negative perception of what has happened, while from the assessments that I have seen, also talking with other lecturers at the business school, they were very much happy to see that at least all the effort put by us, it has been somehow well perceived by the students, and also different type of assessment, you know, some exams that are, you know, these 24-hour exams, where you have the possibility to use an open book exam at home, deliver. I think that this is another way of assessing them, and they feel that is more realistic towards the times where we are, you know, that they have access to all the information in the web, and they also can, you know, already gather information, preparing for this potential 24-hour assessment. So I think that there are good things there that probably will be nice if you are also illustrating them in your results, because also talking actually with my family, my niece and nephew, they are in different disciplines, different universities in the UK, and they had again different perceptions, you know. So also I think it's very much biased towards the discipline. So but very, very interesting, and I'm looking forward to read the papers coming out from this report that you are now working on, and hopefully looking forward to meet face to face. So maybe inviting you to come over to the institute whenever everything finish, and you are settled down back in Uppsala, as you were saying that you are moving houses. So thank you very much for today.
Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, and please keep sending us papers and anything. Also, we will send you some research that we are also conducting on the role of universities. Thank you very much all for coming today. We will have another seminar in 2 weeks' time when we have Beatrice from LSE coming to give a paper on big data. And yeah, thank you very much for today. I think I'm closing now the session. And thanks again, Rhiannon, for presenting your paper today.
Thanks very much.